Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. Try to grow my station or my channel. For some reason, YouTube doesn't want me to get to 25,000. Don't know why. I think there's something going on with the algorithm, but I don't know. See how I could be stuck at 24,800 for 4 months. Just doesn't seem possible, especially because I was doing 1,000 a month for the previous months every month. I was gaining 1,000 and then all of a sudden stopped. But anyway, that said, today I got a really special guest, a guy I've always liked. I met him in 2015 at the Secret Space Conference in Texas, right outside of Austin. Can't remember the name of the town. And uh, uh, Walter served in the AFOSI, which is the Office of Special Investigations for the Air Force. And then when he got out of the Air Force, he started writing a bunch of very strange books, which are really good. Latitude 33. Walter and I share an interest in the history of California. I'm absolutely fascinated by California history, even before the Europeans arrived. It's absolutely amazing and fantastic, and in a lot of ways inexplicable. But anyway, let's get to Walter. Hey, Walter, how you doing?
Hey, Jay, it's good to be here.
Yeah, yeah. So the reason I like your work so much is because, well, first off, you're unafraid to tackle really strange subjects, but and the underlying history of California is in your work, which I really like. But it's that you are like touching on your books several times on this whole idea that there's some kind of secret underground project that's been going on for a long time, and it seems as if, to me, it started with Napoleon. And that doesn't surprise me, by the way, because I think it went on before Napoleon, but Napoleon became the chief financier of this project. And I think it came out of the alchemical milieu of France, actually. I think that the Templars came back to France with all their knowledge and began building cathedrals and doing all this crazy stuff and alchemy and everything. And it was centered in France. And so I think Napoleon actually came out of that milieu and decided that he was going to put, some muscle behind all of this. And, he went to Egypt and did a lot of other things. But what say you about that?
Oh, I agree with you. What most people don't realize, and this is not just me saying this, but historians are increasingly writing about this and presenting this. Andrew Roberts, being a British historian leading the charge, is in that Napoleon Bonaparte is probably the most slandered historical figure of the past over 200 years. Anytime people hear me say that and they point out, but what about all and you can counter that every time with the facts.
Yep.
And a lot of this has to do with exactly what you were saying. Napoleon Bonaparte was such an important figure in the breakdown of the dynastic establishment. In fact, historians credit him with putting the final nail in the coffin of feudalism. Feudalism was still alive into the 19th century, but Napoleon Bonaparte is credited with what he brought about officially ended feudalism, and the dynastic families have never forgiven him for that, even centuries later. As a matter of fact, this whole new world order globalist system, all this stuff they're doing today and have been doing in the last several decades is part of the reaction, believe it or not, to Napoleon Bonaparte over 200 years ago. And it does involve the pursuit of exotic technologies, because, as you know, in my book, The Esoteric Napoleon, I outline, I lay out there that Napoleon was fascinated with this stuff.
Yep.
And I agree with you. He may very well have been secretly the one who gave the endowment to the United States to found the Smithsonian Institution. Yep. I mean, that's a very strong possibility. And of course, as we know, these exotic technologies and the pursuit of this comes from a very old tradition, right? An ancient tradition, which, yes, indeed, the Templars would have got their hands on part of this. And then that's where the roots of the modern secret pursuit of these advanced exotic technologies began, with the Templars, and not only what they brought back from the Middle East, but what was captured during the Fourth Crusade, when they sacked Constantinople and the archive there, because the archive there was known to have some of the same items and even the remnant items from the Library of Alexandria. So between the Templars and the German Teutonic Knights, there's your German connection, which is very important to all this, particularly in the last couple hundred years. Yeah, that's where this secret pursuit of this actually began. It's no accident that the United States began its involvement in this pursuit in earnest in the wake of Operation Paperclip after World War II, because these German scientists dragged us into this pursuit.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating story, the whole German side of it. It's interesting because the one movie that Stanley Kubrick didn't make but really wanted to was on Napoleon, and I'm in the process right now of getting the screenplay he wrote.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, wouldn't that be a script you'd like to read, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know that Ridley Scott is making a Napoleon film.
No, really?
He's in production, and Joaquin Phoenix has been cast. Now, I think that's excellent casting.
That is excellent casting.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed that Ridley Scott does not present the typical British propaganda, of 200 years, and just tells that traditional wrong, untrue version of Napoleon Bonaparte. I really hope he shakes things up and presents the accurate view, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, he was good friends with Stanley. So I'm sure he went and visited Stanley many times at St. Albans, because Stanley really liked Alien and Blade Runner, thought they were brilliant. And so I'm going to say that he may have read the script.
That's cool. I would like to think that Stanley Kubrick was probably into the true version of the Napoleon story, and not just the typical. Kubrick doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would go along with the status quo on things.
No, he would not. And furthermore, Robert Temple, who was friends with Stanley, told me that Kubrick was obsessed with exotic, unknown technologies.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
And also Kubrick's family, the woman he married was the Harlans. It was an upper crust German family who were pro-German in the 40s, you might say. So that's curious, since he's Jewish. And so anyway, Napoleon, I'll have to get that. If I get a copy, I'll send it to you so you can read it too.
That would be fantastic.
I'll get that. So I'm working on that right now. I've got one of Kubrick's aides who said he's going to get it to me. So we'll see. I don't know. The guy's farted out on me before, so they won't let me look at the archives. I requested to look at Kubrick's archives, and they said, no, you can't look at them. Yeah,
people don't realize that that's how he ended up doing Barry Lyndon, right? Was because of the 1970 Waterloo movie, he didn't do his Napoleon film.
One of the worst films.
I know. It's like, Stanley.
Rod Steiger.
I wish you'd done that.
He's so overacted in that movie. But I wonder, though, because Barry Lyndon is a story about a guy who rose up into the ranks of the upper crust and then was dashed down. I'm wondering if that isn't the undercurrent of the Napoleon film, right?
Yeah. Even though, Barry, the character Barry Lyndon, of course, based on, some previous writings, and he ends up being a big jerk. But you're right. There seems to be that similarity in the arc of Napoleon's life, and you're right, what Barry Lyndon goes through, because he was born on Corsica, right?
Yep.
Doing a brain dump. Yes, Corsica. And he was Italian. There's a lot of people that actually don't realize that Napoleon was Italian born, and France controlled Corsica at the time. That's how he ended up, and he hated France when he was a kid. He learned to love it after his dad shipped him and his brother off to school. But
That's really interesting, because Barry Lyndon was born in Ireland and then became a big guy in England and disdained Ireland. So I don't know. It's a strange story.
There's an interest. It's interesting.
And I don't believe, by the way, that the Waterloo excuse. Kubrick was at the height of his power. He was at his early 70s. He was at the height of his power. He could do anything he wanted. And no director ever got the power over a movie that Stanley Kubrick had, and no director ever will have that power again. So I don't believe that. I believe that he was told, no, you're not making this one.
Yeah, so, and that, what does that tell you, or what does that suggest? That suggests that he wanted to tell a more accurate, honest story. And think about it. Where did he make his films? In England. They had a stake in, no way in hell are you going to tell the truth about Napoleon. I mean, you have people that still believe that Nostradamus identified Napoleon as
Apollonial.
And even the guy who wrote the book, this is over 100 years ago, the guy that wrote, or not 100 years ago, but the guy who wrote that book that made that claim that that's what Nostradamus said, even he admitted decades ago that his book was inaccurate because it was based on a very bad translation of the French. So even he said that's BS.
It is BS. And as a Nostradamus expert, I can tell you it's BS. Total BS. The history part is actually could be right. I'm not sure, but the Napoleon part, that is not even a. It's supposed to be a what do you call it when you jumble the words up?
An anagram.
Yeah, it was supposed to be an anagram on Napoleon, but he had the French wrong. If there wasn't an anagram, if you can read French, so it was like, what? I remember the first time I saw that, I was just scratching my head trying to figure it out, getting in arguments with people, and. Yeah. So anyway, so Napoleon goes off to Egypt and brings all these savants and scientists. And so he, obviously in the alchemical circles and in the Templar circles of France, the rumors about Egypt and what was really there were really going at this time. And so Napoleon goes to Egypt, and we don't really know what he discovered there, do we?
Right. But here's what's interesting. On his way, they stop at Malta, and he recruits several soldiers from Malta who are Templars, essentially. They're Templars, and they're absorbed into his savant group. So I suspect that that what he was doing was, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was going to Malta to pick up certain Templars that knew certain things about what we're talking about, and then they continued on to Egypt. And remember, before they even left, Monge, who was his closest advisor and the father of oh my gosh, he was the father of one of the geometric processes, one of the maths. And he was Napoleon's closest advisor, and very much into esoteric things. He had presented and what is it, an 11,000 or 1,100-year-old? It was a very old papyrus, and we don't know what to this day what was inside that papyrus. And then from there is where Napoleon really geared up, got to go to Egypt. And they took that papyrus with them. And the clues we have as to what was found, you could say, would be in the places that they focused on going.
Right.
But yeah, we don't know exactly. We are left with the legendary story of his night in the pyramid, which I think really happened.
I do too.
In my book, I lay out that Monge had a hypothesis that upon, when you look at it, I think Monge knew where what became to be known as the Monge Point was inside the pyramid. Now, the Monge Point is that point where all the planes of a geometric figure, specifically a pyramidal figure, where all those planes meet, okay, and intersect, that's the Monge point. And what's interesting is I propose in my book that the Monge point of the Great Pyramid is the King's Chamber, is in the King's Chamber.
Yep.
And I think Napoleon was guided by Monge and stayed the night in there. And in what that point is very possibly the intersection that of multiple dimensions.
Yep.
And that's the experience, because the legend is that Napoleon spends a night in the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, and when he emerges the next morning, he's white as a sheet and nervous. And someone asks, an assistant asks him what happened, general, and he's like, if you wouldn't believe it if I told you. And I go into this in my book, The Esoteric Napoleon. So yeah, his whole purpose was going to Egypt. Yeah, there was the strategic purpose. That's how he convinced the Directorate of France, the government, to go ahead and supply and fund this expedition. Oh, it's great for France to fight Britain. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll do it. And also, his potential political rivals wanted him gone. They were hoping he would die in France because he was gaining popularity then. So they had their reasons to go along with it. But his true purpose was all this esoterica.
You're making me think that of the parallels. I don't want to get politics in here because I don't do politics, but there are some strange parallels between the 45th president of the United States and Napoleon. They're both into exotic technologies, and they both got rousted.
Yeah, in terms of Napoleon, see, Napoleon was the most slandered national leader of his day. I mean, ridiculous lies told about him.
Absolutely.
He had the connection to the, I noticed when I was in my research, and working on the book, I was like, oh my God. But and
now he's in exile, right?
Yeah, I've allowed people to draw their own conclusions in any parallels they might see. But if you understand what we're talking about, then you also, if you see what we're talking about as far as the parallel today, you have a better understanding of what was done to Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, the British, it got to where, they would tell their children, oh, he eats babies. And I mean, all this ridiculous stuff, because the British monarchy and City of London were scared to death of him. Even though he was a guy, like we talked about Barry Lyndon, a regular guy, a so-called commoner who rose to great heights, there is evidence that the reason he scared the dynasties was that he actually had the oldest claim to the strongest thrones of Europe, and that's what scared them. And that would be.
Are you saying that he might have been a Merovingian?
Yes.
Oh,
yes, he may have been a Merovingian through his mother's side, because in my research I found an interesting little story about a Princess Albswinda. Now, Albswinda was the daughter of one of the Frankish kings that was the top dog at the time, and she had been kidnapped and taken to Rome. And disappeared from history after that. So her ancestors would have grown up in Italy. Now, there's strong reason to suspect that Napoleon's mother was a descendant of Albswinda, who then, so therefore was of the French Merovingian bloodline. So through his mother, and we don't really know who his father was, because the man who's identified as his father wasn't likely his real dad. So there's all sorts of reasons to suspect that not only were they scared of his military brilliance, because Napoleon Bonaparte is studied to this day in military colleges around the world, including the United States. He was a brilliant tactician, and he was kicking their butts all over every battlefield that they faced his army on. And that scared them, but also what looks like his legitimate claim, and the fact that in spite of that, even if he knew that or suspected it, when you look closely, the places Napoleon would conquer, he would then set up a much more egalitarian type of society than you would expect, and that was normal and usual and common in those times. And the conquered peoples ended up going, oh, wait a minute now, we kind of like this system. And that's what scared the dynasties and the monarchs, was because he started the whole idea where people were like, hey, this self-governing thing, like the new United States back then was doing, okay. And that pissed them off essentially, because, hey, the British Empire was, they had already kind of been embarrassed by us, right? And now here was Napoleon embarrassing them, and basically he was beating them at their own game, and they didn't like that. So, but my point was, even though he may have been of a dynasty himself, he wasn't setting up a government or a realm like that to rule as a big king. Some of his methods of municipality and city governance and stuff we still use today, even in the States. It's astonishing how much of our modern world you can trace back to Napoleon Bonaparte, either he himself or the people he hired to set these things up based on his idea.
Yeah, and people don't realize that the founding of the United States would never have happened if it hadn't been for France and their intervention.
Right.
And that was mostly because they hated England, but there were other reasons. Because getting back to this project, that the secret project, the United States, after Napoleon, then becomes the place on the ground where this esoteric, whatever it is, starts taking place. It moves from Europe across the water, first on the East Coast in North Carolina and around the East Coast. And then you can see it slowly migrating with America to California and the West Coast, which is where it really took root, I believe. I believe this whole project. And that's why all the big aerospace companies are out there and all of that, because they were all born out of this project.
I think that has to do with also the reason they settled here the way they have, and a lot of stuff developed here, was, I think that has to do with something going on in California in particular, something that was known to the ancient world. In my book, Secret Missions 5, Veiled Destinies, I have, it's kind of funny, I like to joke about it. There's one chapter, it's almost 90 something pages long. I should have broke it out, but I didn't. I was on a roll. But I get into the Spanish legends of the California, the island of California,
Right.
and the Amazons and Queen Calafia and all that. There may have been some truth to that legend, and the Spanish of the 15th and 16th century age of exploration, certain among them knew that the novel, the Adventures of Esplandian, I think, if I have that title right, they knew that it was a code for a place that was very real. And I analyzed what's said in the novel and what's known about California, its geophysicality, its wildlife, and everything. It's really interesting that there are parallels. So you get the idea that the Spanish legends of, this fictitious California, you get the idea that, wait a minute, this is based on somebody having come here. I'm located in California, and had reported back things that they saw. And to me, the obvious choice of those somebodies that the Spanish could have got their hands on by the 15th and 16th century were the Templars, who came to the Americas, came, to North America in particular, and probably explored all the way to the West Coast. I think it was Templar information that led to these so-called Spanish legends. And I think that's part of the secret of California's lost history, ancient history.
I agree. And there's all Templar gold mines in in California that predate European arrival. Even have a Templar sign outside the mine. And then there's this kind of weird stuff that I've been discovering lately, which is like dilapidated ruins in California in photographs that were taken in the 1880s. It's quite strange. Like dilapidated cathedral out in the desert in California that's all completely falling apart in 1880. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? And then the curious case of how quickly San Francisco was built. It literally must have had 30,000 workers working day and night to build, because there's nothing there in 1850, but by 1859, there's 1,000 buildings, 3 cathedrals. It's incredible. And of course, it all got destroyed in the Great Fire. So we don't have any ruin.
Sechery, a friend of mine and author of some interesting books, he has a theory that, as a matter of fact, he's written it in a book that we're going to be re-releasing. I publish his stuff, but he has a very interesting hypothesis that the 1906 earthquake was caused on purpose. Yep. And it was activated by, I think it was flooding what is now the Salton Sea. Okay. And what they did was they knew they were messing with the tectonic plates, and they knew that by causing pressure down here in Southern California, the Salton Sea is about an hour or so away from where I live, that it would cause an earthquake up north. There were people, civic leaders in San Francisco, that hated old San Francisco, that San Francisco you talked about being built in 1850. They hated it. They wanted to usher in a new San Francisco. So that's why they let old San Francisco burn. They did not as much as they could have to stop those fires. They let it burn because they wanted that San Francisco to go away.
Actually, that happened across the United States.
Oh, well,
Chicago, even where I'm from, Omaha, they just let the whole place just get rid of it, tear it down, get it out.
Isn't there also a suspicion that that kind of thing is what happened in the Great London Fire?
Yes.
Shakespeare Day, that it was.
Of course. And they turned it into the city of London right after it.
Yeah.
Right after the 66 fire. Then all of a sudden it was a different country. It was like Washington, D.C. or the Vatican, right? And, that's super suspicious. And so I don't know what's causing these fires, but they just suddenly went away after San Francisco. They just stopped. All of a sudden, 100 years of burning down America just ended after the San Francisco earthquake fire.
And then in the last 10 years, we have these weird fires.
Yes, we do. Yes.
That.
Yep. In Northern California, the fires avoid the rich areas and just burn out the poor areas. It's quite fascinating.
Imagine that, yikes.
So you've been using fire for a long time to clear things out and remake things.
Sure.
And everything. And I believe that's exactly what happened in San Francisco, but it still doesn't explain how a city of 1,000 people in 1848 could turn out that many buildings in that record time. And that is a mystery. And if you go look at the archives of San Francisco, they don't explain it. They'll say, the St. Francis Hotel was started today, 1888 or whatever, right? Oh, this was started today, this building. But what about all the other buildings? All the ones that are in between, and the amount of granite that they had to bring in from Angel Island just seems incredible. I mean,
are there any records of migrant workers that they mentioned?
Nope. The coolies didn't come until like 1870s or so. That's Cliff High. He keeps arguing with me that no, they brought the coolies in from China and they built all that out and they did it in record time. And I'm trying to think, well, yeah, except that the coolies were actually known as being construction workers. They were more like building railroads and stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
The only thing I could think is where most of it, and the reason it burned down the way it did so easily, was a lot of it was wood construction. But there were some stone.
No, there was stone, stone on the outside, wood on the inside. And the funny thing about the San Francisco earthquake fire is the way the walls have this odd angle to them, almost like they got, I don't know, I can't explain it. It's not like earthquake damage. And they certainly did let it burn because nobody was trying to stop anything. And the people were just having picnics on Nob Hill and watching everything burn.
Right.
And it was quite amazing. And no, I don't buy the whole idea of these people that are saying that the Expo of San Francisco had been there the whole time. I've seen pictures of San Francisco for the fire. There's no Expo there. So don't, these people that bring up this stuff, just like the Expo in Chicago in 1891. Chicago burned down in 1871. There are no buildings left.
Right.
Biggest fire in U.S. history.
And we have, historical figures like Walt Disney's father, Elias, was when he was younger, was one of the construction workers that helped build the White City.
Absolutely.
There in Chicago.
That's what inspired Walt to make Disneyland.
Yeah. People don't realize that the 1893 Chicago World's Fair was attended by, I think they said, 25% of the entire U.S. population at that time. Now think about that. 1/4 of the population of the U.S. was estimated to have, if they didn't live close, they journeyed there. And that's not even counting the people coming from other countries. So that was this huge event that there is much documented of.
Absolutely.
I have seen original photos. It's fantastic. There is a museum of all places in this museum out in Yucca Valley. There is a book published the year of the fair. It's in the vault. You got to use the white gloves to look at it. And it's these beautiful crystal clear plates of the photos of the building of the Chicago World's Fair, and then pictures taken after it was built. And of course, the photos in the book the book is so pristine that it looks like it was just built yesterday, and these are
I'd like to see
photos,
that.
but it shows you the progress and when they started building it and stuff. So, but I'm intrigued by what you're saying about, in spite of that, there's still something curious about how fast they built the Barbary Coast, San Francisco.
Absolutely, because okay. So at bare minimum in Europe at that time, when before using the same building materials, it took somewhere between 80 to 200 years to build a cathedral. Okay, San Francisco's got 3 by 1859. Very religious town, I guess, right? And they're quite ornate. They all got destroyed in the earthquake fire and got rebuilt, but they're very ornate. But there's no history. There's literally no history. I've gone in. I tried to find. I found the name out. Then I tried to find out when it was built, who the architect was, all that. And there's just no history. It's just like the most baffling thing I've ever seen.
I love the duality of that, because old Barbary Coast, San Francisco was probably the most hedonistic city in the United States at the time. And they had 3 cathedrals.
I mean, they were Shanghaiing people. And I mean, it was just,
the San Francisco itself. I've been intrigued because I've had to cover this in 2 books. Juan Cabrillo is, we are told that, golly, he was hugging the coastline really tight, but missed the opening to what we call San Francisco Bay today. But he sailed on north and he found the mouth of the Russian River. Now, I don't know if you spent much time on the California coast, but just look at a map, folks. Fog or not, and this, fog or not, if you're hugging that coastline, when the mouth of that bay opens up, it opens up. Okay, you're not going to miss San Francisco Bay. I don't care how much fog there is if you're following as close to the coastline as he was. And then we're told that they not only missed it going up, but they missed it coming down. Baloney. People don't know that this was his flagship. He got separated in a storm from the other 2 boats. He disappears for 3 days from the other 2 boats, and then they reconnect like off of Monterey South. I argue in my
Uh,
book that of course he found San Francisco Bay. That's what he was doing for 3 days, was secretly exploring it, because they had been looking for the Northwest Passage. And you're going up the coast of California at that time, any right turn could be the Northwest Passage. But I think that would have been even a cover story, because I think back then, due to this Esplandian novel and what the Spanish Templars knew about North America and California in particular, I think he knew darn well that San Francisco Bay would be there. And I think they were looking for something that would eventually lead to the gold. I go over all the details in my book.
Yeah, I think, here's what I think. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. First off, when you're going up and hugging a coast, what you do periodically is you lower a bucket down, and especially if there's a big opening, and you drink the water. If it's slightly fresh, then you know that there's this opening has streams and rivers and everything. So you would definitely take it. So in fog or not, your taste would know that was a freshwater source, and you would be looking for freshwater sources. That's first off. Secondly, I believe that he had been told by the Templars to find that there was something special there. And third, and I've got actual documents on this, in 1836, there's a ship that lands in Hawaii, and on the manifest it says that they stopped at the port of San Francisco. 1836. Okay. I have another, I forget which president it was, but the president, like about 1840, grants a curatorship to a bunch of people all across the country. One is in San Francisco. Okay, isn't a city, it isn't a state yet, all right, but it's got a port. Even though the drawings don't show a port, it is a really good portage. I'm not going to deny that. But so I think happened is that there was some construction already there, and the Templars were probably the ones that built it, and the Templars built cathedrals. So, right? And I don't think they built it out that much, but they built enough buildings to make it worth settling there, because I mean, you got buildings already. And and I think I'll even go one step further. I do believe they did discover gold in 1848, but I think they blew it all out of proportion to drive the population from the east to the west to create manifest destiny. And once they got secured California, then the whole inner part of the country was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
And so California becomes this like super important place for the creation of the 50 states of the United, or 48 states of the United States. People don't emphasize or understand that enough. And the people coming to California in the 1850s were not construction workers. They were miners.
Right.
They were here to hit it rich. Yeah. I mean, they were. And furthermore, I live in a mining town from the 1880s, right here in southern Colorado. And it still exists. All the buildings that were here when there was 30,000 people here, now there's 2,000, back in the 1880s, are all still here. And you can see them in their dilapidated wooden shacks, essentially. Not the kind of construction that San Francisco had. San Francisco would look more like Deadwood if it was a mining town than it would this resplendent city. I mean, by 1859, this is vying Manhattan for buildings and for being crammed in. And
at the time,
the other problem is in the photographs of the 1880s that are taken, or no, 1850s. That's when the first photographs of San Francisco were taken. There's a lack of people on the street. Now, I don't know if the photographer was able to talk everybody into staying inside or what, but there's also another thing. There's no horse poop anywhere. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, shouldn't there be horse poop everywhere? So I don't know. I mean, the ferry building, that's an incredible structure. So I don't know. It's
in early photography. Now, by the 1850s, photography had advanced, obviously, because by the time we get to Matthew Brady, in the decade later, but in early photography, the camera, get this, could not pick up people moving,
Well,
and
they'd be
in a lot
blurred.
of yeah, or they'd be blurred, or they wouldn't be there at all. So it would look like an empty scene when actually there had been people moving. Or the other explanation could be another explanation could be maybe he took it so early on, a Sunday morning or something, these photos,
Yep.
but then
Or
you
it could
still the
be
question.
It could be also, since it was such a rare thing, that the city of San Francisco was going to get behind the photographer and give him
Sure.
help because he was, chronicling their city in a way
Yeah.
that they wanted. So it could be that. So I don't discount any of those, and I just find it strange that there's hardly any people. It's the horse
It
poop.
is interesting. Yeah.
The horse poop worries me.
I find, I find your hypothesis, the idea of a Templar outpost being built up more, to be very intriguing, and it rhymes with, certainly with my suspicions about not just California and not just how far west the Templars came, but what I suspect about Cabrillo himself having become knighted as a Templar. This is all undercover, of course, by the 16th century. He's Hidalgo status. I think he was knighted as a Templar on this expedition, which, by the way, he didn't come home from, and to this day, no one knows where his body is, and that's a big part of my books. But it would make sense. It would add to the making sense of why he was so secretive about going into San Francisco Bay, if he already was expecting to meet Templars there at a Templar outpost.
Yep. That's exactly what I think. I think that they were already there. It's a perfect spot. They can watch any boats coming in and out. They can watch the boats going by. People don't.
It could also explain the possibility that Francis Drake, Drake's Bay, I think, is a red herring. It could also explain Drake going into San Francisco Bay and not saying a word about a Templar outpost, because if he himself was
a Templar,
he wasn't going to spill those beans.
Yeah, of course. So they're all Templars, and they're making California into this really special place for their project. Now we know the Templars were after artifacts, books, anything that would help explain what they thought was a vast advanced civilization some time ago. They believed that, and they were doing everything they can to prove that. And I believe that they found that in California. They found evidence of advanced, they weren't advanced then, they were remnants of an advanced civilization that was in California. Why wouldn't you be in California with that weather, And that would be where they would choose. And, probably the nicest place on earth. And also, the natives, like the Chumash, they told me that when they arrived here, there were already these tall people that were living here, and they're Polynesian more than Native American. So
a lot of people don't realize that the Chumash are actually traditionally a seafaring tribe. And that separates them from the other tribes of California. They were a seafaring tribe.
That's right, and they even had folk stories of voyages to visit the Maori in New Zealand and going to Hawaii, and they were like really good seamen, and people don't realize that.
They would build. They're famous for their what's called a tomol, which is a pearl canoe. It's a ceremonial canoe, a seagoing canoe.
Yep.
And they would build these in sacred places. And what I learned in my research on my Empire of the Wheel stuff about the weird occult murders here in San Bernardino.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I learned that just yards from one of the murder sites was a sacred site that the Chumash would travel out here to the San Bernardino Valley for centuries for their shaman and their sacred canoe builders, tomo builders, to build the canoes right there in that spot, which is literally 1 mile from my doorstep. And that just kind of blew my mind. I'm like, you know, why wasn't this sacred spot nearer the sea? Well, when you consider the geophysical traits that I was talking about, when you consider the telluric current ley line energy grid that's here in the San Bernardino Valley, that spot is right there in a major energy configuration. And the Chumash were aware of that kind of information. And that's why they would build their canoes in these spots related to the telluric currents. It makes you wonder, was there some type of symbolic or based on reality, was there some type of lodestone navigation that these ancient seafarer ancestors of theirs would use that somehow was built into the canoe? Now, the front of the canoe has this interesting fat kind of knob nose shape. Would they put the lodestone in there, and did the lodestone guide them along the telluric current of the earth and help? Was it their autopilot, so to speak, navigation system of ancient times in these canoes? I don't know. These, you know, it smacks of some ancient lost technology or knowledge.
Well, yeah, and then there's the upside down arrowhead on the mountain in the San Bernardino
Oh,
Mountain.
yes.
And also the Chumash told me that the what do they call them? The illuminated ones lived up there,
Yes.
up in the San Bernardino Mountains, and they would have they would go up there like occasionally and meet with them and exchange information and
right. I think that people that have been here and looked into the history of this place, and particularly the esoteric history of this place, they'll all tell you there is something about San Bernardino Valley that is incredibly important. At one time, its energy was strong, and it was, believe it or not, this was before LA became a city and all that. San Bernardino here was the garden spot of California, Southern California, and at one point, and I believe it was in 1915 with these rituals that I talk about, I think San Bernardino Valley was, if you can assassinate a place, San Bernardino Valley was cursed with the events of 1915. It was somebody either made a mistake in something they were doing to manipulate the energies, or it was done on purpose. And because now anyone that's a scholar of the area, particularly the esoteric aspects of it, will tell you it has become a very dark place.
Yes, it is.
A very dark place.
Yes, it has.
It's a place of dark magic and great power.
Yeah, the recession of 2008 didn't help, boy. Pushed Riverside. Oh my God.
Yeah, and that's, so when I say they assassinate a city, they do it, of course, economically, financially is one of the easiest hits to do. And during that year, that time, the city went literally bankrupt. And here's another interesting thing. San Bernardino is a major metropolitan area of Southern California outside of LA. Okay, it was. And when they finished building our newer freeways out here, they removed San Bernardino off the freeway signs. That's also part of a way of erasing it out of the public mind. Is what they do is that Redlands is a much smaller city, and yet Redlands is what's on the freeway signs, or just Palm Springs. You know, in other words, they want you to go past San Bernardino. They want you to not realize it's there. And I find that to be part of, and I remember when they did this, it was about 10 or so years ago. San Bernardino used to be out in an area called Rancho Cucamonga, where two major freeways connect, or three actually. They had San Bernardino, you know, go this direction for San Bernardino for decades. And then about 10 years ago or so, they removed that, and it wasn't there. Now they put it on another sign, but it's just not as prevalent as it was. And that's another way that you can subtly erase a place.
Yep. Yeah, I lived up there. I lived in Crestline.
Oh yeah, okay.
In the 80s, when I was working in Hollywood, my weekend house, beautiful house up in the woods, and just really magical there, really magical, and great views of the desert through the woods.
Oh yeah,
always like so spectacular. Really
I stay
important.
there once in a while. Once a year, a good friend of mine, or a writer, lives up there. Scott DeHart, co-author with Joseph Farrell. He
Right.
and his wife live up there, and when they go traveling, they let me watch their cabin house.
Nice.
And so it's great up there. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. So this project, it gets the Templars are obviously behind the project,
Yeah, I
which
think.
I'm glad you find my San Francisco Templar theory intriguing because I find it incredible, and I think they were in other places in California
Sure. Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Um, different spots that are not as big. They weren't really in LA. But probably because of the water situation, I would guess.
Right.
And LA is not as beautiful. It got better weather, but not as beautiful as
Right.
the Bay Area. So I believe the Templars are behind the the Germans and the airship stuff that you're really the one that brought it out. The Charles Delshaw, right?
Yeah. Delshow is our original source of this mysterious Nimza. And I put a finer point on it. I would say the Teutonic Knights are behind the German involvement in that, because the Teutonic Knights are essentially the stepbrothers, so to speak, of the Templars.
Yeah,
When you look at their history,
sure.
they were just the German offshoot of the Templars, kind of a friendly rivals, and they would have been a major beneficiary of the sacking of Constantinople, and they would have got much of the
Definitely.
same type of information that the Templars got their hands on elsewhere.
You got it. And so they came and they moved everything out to California because the Templars had already set everything up for them.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I actually believe this all leads up, believe it or not, to the secret space program. I actually that the secret space program is the culmination of Project X. And no, I don't believe any of these people who are coming out publicly and saying they were in the secret space program, because that's not, you can't. People who claim that they go to top secret briefings and then immediately get on Facebook and Twitter and tell thousands of people what they just heard. Come
Yeah.
on, folks.
Exactly. And if
It's
you're
either
believing
not
that
top
stuff,
secret or it's bullshit.
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So and here's the other thing. I'll bring this up just as an aside. I was having a long talk with David Paulides.
Uh-huh.
Oh, maybe 3 years ago. He came down here to visit me, and he told me something which made my jaw drop. I said, "Is there anything about all these missing people that you're investigating that you think needs to get out? Anything?" He said, "Well, there is one weird thing
Yes.
that I've discovered." And I go, "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "Like 75% of the people that are abducted and disappear are of German descent."
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
What? And they all have high IQs and they're involved in science and technology. And what do you think of that? I mean,
I think that's one of the most fascinating things in his research that he
I do too.
has found, and a lot more significant than people might initially think. He really that is something that if people, if you haven't taken a look at Paulides, anybody, I highly recommend that you do, because whether you whether you actually, I was going to say whether you agree with any of his conclusions, but he doesn't offer any.
Yeah.
He just kind of puts it out there, and
Just a cop.
yeah, he's saying, hey, isn't this interesting? And I find it's interesting the reaction he's received from the forestry agents, the Department of Interior agents, particularly, some of the rude responses. Well, what's going on there? I mean, I agree with them as a former badge carrier myself. It's like, what do you mean your organization doesn't, keep this in a database somewhere?
They do.
Of course they do, and
Come on.
this you'll never get it kind of thing. It's like, wow, what the heck exactly, so I think that the German angle suggests, okay, if we're going to go out on the limb, it suggests some type of technological association with what's going on now, whether that's a technological manipulation of natural resources or forces, or whether it's some technology that is directly responsible for the disappearances, that's a fascinating discussion. Now, I will say this. I was given my maps that you've heard me talk about, people have heard me talk about. I've shown part of them. Sechery handmade a telluric current ley line intersection and grid whatever system map for me. My gosh, back in 2009. Okay, this thing is old and wrinkly, and I've had to tape up parts of it. And when I saw the map that Paulides put together of his research in North America, my jaw dropped.
Really?
Because it's a virtual match of the map of the telluric currents and stuff that Sechery had done for me years before I even heard of David Paulides. And so I think what he's finding, and I think these disappearances have everything to do with the geophysical things that Sechery is identifying. And we even took some of the cases in Yosemite, okay, which is the biggest
hotspot,
the biggest hotspot for this stuff, and it's a dead-on match with Sechery's analysis of the telluric current and the ley line.
I got to see that work.
And here's what's interesting. Just right outside of Yosemite is Tuolumne County. And that's right there where Delschau says the mysterious German, immigrant founded Sonora Aero Club was doing all their weird stuff right there, right outside the western boundary of today's Yosemite National Park. And these disappearances, there's more disappearances from there than anywhere else. It's Paulides hotspot. I can't help but think there's a connection between this weird technology that these German guys were developing and those disappearances.
Okay, you brought something up. Okay, so if you take, there's a map that got released, I don't know when, maybe 20 years ago, of where all the underground trains and bases are, and you lay it right over Paulides' map, and it matches perfectly. So now we have telluric forces, underground bases and trains, and the missing persons, all in the same spots.
Yeah. And the majority of those missing persons have some connection to German heritage and weird technology.
Yeah. And then there's a strange case. There's this really strange case of this is really baffling. It was a professor at the University of Washington, and he went to Olympic National Park to hike. And he gets out of his car and he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, in Pacific Northwest, cold and rainy. He's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, purple socks, big red glasses, and a polka dot hat. And he walks all around the parking lot to say, "Hey, I'm Bill. Nice to meet you. Hey, I'm Bill." And everybody's like, "Who is this guy? He's dressed so weird." And then he goes off and he's never seen again. Right? It's like he knew he was going to disappear. So he dressed as weird as he could so everyone would see him, made sure everyone knew who he was. Right? And he was like this high technology guy at the University of Washington. And when Paulides told me that, I was like, that guy knew he was going away.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a good one. I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah. Wow. So I want to ask you a question, which I've been dying to ask you for a long time, with your background and everything. I think I know what the answer is, but I want to ask it anyway. The alien question. Do you think, we know there's multi-dimensional universe, so anything can be happening, parallel planes and portals and stuff. But do you think specifically that we're dealing with aliens from another planet, or are we just mistaking secret space program stuff for alien technology?
It's all in the mix, is what I think. The overarching thing is, I do think there are extraterrestrials that somebody, somebody among I should say leadership, whatever, that we've been in contact with. I do think there's interdimensional stuff going on. And yeah, I do think there's been a classified manned space program since starting back, right after World War II.
Yep.
So I think it's all in the mix. I do think about 90% of the common legitimate UFO sightings people are seeing is this classified human technology, but that still leaves 10% that's not explained by that. And in that 10% would be included, in my opinion, legitimate extraterrestrials. Now, I think one of the little secrets, or maybe the big secret of the extraterrestrials we're interacting with, is I think some of them are human beings exactly like us, but from elsewhere. And for some reason, they don't want us even thinking that there are human beings from outer space. That's why they push, there's no way that human beings could develop anywhere but here on Earth, which is nonsense. Think about that. That's nonsensical in the face of it, just to say that. It's ignorant. And why would they not want us to know that? Because think how easy it would be for non-Earth extraterrestrial human beings to move and live among us, which I think is going on.
You too.
But I think that it's all of that you mentioned, I think, is in the mix. And I've
all of the above
for a long time. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think people are probably confusing interdimensionals with extraterrestrials, and they're probably encouraged to do so. If you're an interdimensional and you don't want someone to know where you're actually coming from, and they think you're from another planet, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and think that, because it's wrong. So they don't care where that leads you. They just don't want to lead you to where they're really from. And the same thing with extraterrestrials, and the irony is I think it's all true.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's all
I just don't believe every storyteller that we hear in this community.
Exactly.
There's a lot of lies and nonsense, just because I think those things are real. I don't buy every time somebody claims,
Yeah, I agree with you. And that would make a lot of sense in that they it looks to me like the ETs are using our resources,
sure,
taking our water. It looks like they defanged the nuclear system of all the countries. That's why I'm seriously not worried about Putin launching a nuclear missile strike, because I don't think that any of them work anymore. I think they've all been defanged.
Also, we talked about modern examples of the Napoleon thing.
Yeah,
I think Putin might be another example of, and people are going to say, but Walter, you were a federal agent. Yeah, I did. I worked against the Soviet Union for years, and then I worked against Russian agents after that. Yeah, I did. But the Russia of today and the Putin of today is not the Soviet Union. And nope. I think Putin's getting the Napoleonic slander treatment from the West. I'm in that camp.
So. I'm in that camp too. I think he's actually been a fairly good leader for Russia. And I know he kills people, and they all
maybe. You mean as far as like the assassinations and stuff?
I would say he's probably, those look like ex-KGB activities, don't they?
I think definitely, yeah. The assassinations are going on. Yeah, it has the hallmark of the old KGB and the stuff like that. But I wonder how much of that really has come from Putin ordering it. How much of it is enthusiastic mid-level or high-level underlings?
I think that his advisor, whose daughter got killed a couple of weeks ago in an explosion,
that guy, the radical guy,
that was done by mid-level intel people who are anti-Putin and want Putin out of there because of the sanctions and the oligarchs getting their yachts taken. And
but the irony, with the alleged sanctions is when you look at the numbers, it's not hurting their economy; it's hurting us more.
Yeah, well, we have idiots for leaders, that's for sure. When you weaponize an economy, that is just friggin' evil. I'm sorry.
And it backfires.
And now the whole thing's falling apart for us, I mean. And but we have stupid leaders. So what can I say? when you got a guy with the IQ of a phone booth as your leader, it's like,
But I would say you're somebody. I think something happened that was involved with the de-escalation of the nukes back starting in the Reagan era and continuing into Bush one, that obviously it scared Gorbachev. You know, we have good reason to think that, you know, something and some people say it was SDI, you know, that there was some capability we had, but you know, there's his mysterious statement that people like to joke about sometimes. Would you help us if we had an external threat from space? And Gorbachev said yes. Maybe it wasn't SDI that scared Gorbachev. Maybe it was some type of threat from space issue that Reagan was aware of and shared with Gorbachev.
You know, Reagan had an experience with ETs. You know that, right?
Refresh my memory.
Yeah, Shirley MacLaine says that she was out to dinner with Ron and Nancy when he was governor, and they were outside Santa Barbara where their ranch was, and they were out taking a joyride. They saw a UFO, and it landed by their car, and two ETs got out and walked up to their car. This is what he said, and Nancy confirmed it and said, "You are governor now, but you're going to be president, and you're going to serve our interests and needs." And man, I listening to Shirley MacLaine telling me this, I'm like, my jaw dropping down on the floor. I go, what?
Oh my gosh. And she was serious.
Yeah, she said it was deadly serious. She kept saying, "Are you joking with me?" And she said, "No, I'm not." So Reagan had a really a close encounter of the third kind.
Before you know, there's that thing that whatever it was they told Carter, that, you know, the story is he broke down and was weeping for hours after he was told. So think about it. There's that story about what you're saying about Reagan. Okay. And then we know that something he knew that he shared with Gorbachev, you know, it got Gorbachev's attention. But before that, something Carter was told scared the hell out of him. You know, I have been questioning these last couple of years the popular conclusion of the so-called Wernher von Braun deathbed confession.
Right.
And when you look deeper into that whole thing, there's reasons to question either if it wasn't, if what Carol Rosen tells us might not have been a misinterpretation that she had of what he meant. The other side of the spectrum is, did it really happen? I mean, she's the only source of this alleged, you know, this conversation, this deathbed confession, and she didn't reveal it publicly till the late 90s when 3 out of the 5 things that he predicted in this confession had already become known history, and then the other, you know, the fourth one, asteroids, is logical, and so here's what I'm questioning. People like to say, oh, there is no extraterrestrial threat because Wernher von Braun said it would all be a lie. But I think what Wernher von Braun was saying was a lie, was what the globalists were what it is I think what he was saying is the globalists, the tyrants, were going to use the extraterrestrial threat against us. And what would be a lie would be the reasons that they would be using to get us to buy off on some new Patriot Act that's even worse than the Patriot Act. And it's not that there is no extraterrestrial threat, it's that they would use that. Like terrorism is real. There are terrorists out there, but during the early 2000s, they used terrorists and real terrorism to get us to buy off on handing some of our freedoms over, and they did nefarious things in the name of protecting us from terrorism. So my view, if Wernher von Braun actually did say these words, I think it's more likely that what he meant was an extraterrestrial threat would be real, but they would use it to do nefarious political and governmental and control things to us. Because in my mind, it is absolutely ridiculous and childish and ignorant to actually believe that in the vastness of space, we're not going to encounter a threatening civilization, a belligerent civilization, that we're not going to encounter some conquering culture out there. Come on. That everybody in outer space are happy, loving space angel brothers. That's just not logical.
No.
And so, when you look at whatever Carter was told, if the story's true, that made him break down, whatever prompted Reagan to ask Gorbachev if there was a threat from space, would you help us? Because also around that time, you had the Kuiper Aerial Observatory,
Right.
which I got to have a personal tour of out at Moffett Field because an in-law was married to one of the scientists, NASA scientists, and he took me on a tour of this thing. And here's what's interesting was their mission once a year, their sole mission at that time was to fly down to New Zealand and for a couple of months closely observe a piece of the night sky that you can only see from down there near Antarctica. Okay. Now, since then, in recent years, that part of the sky, that part of space has popped up in these other claims and stories and rumors of something or somebody coming from that direction in space that's of concern to us. Now, when I went on this Kuiper Flying Observatory, every crewman on board, that it was a NASA plane, we are told, but every person on that flight crew was in military jumpsuits, U.S. Air Force to be specific. I think there were a couple of Navy guys, and definite military haircuts. So that was a military crew on, and people forget that NASA is actually a DoD charter organization. NASA is a national security outfit. People don't know that.
Yep.
So I put all of that together, and I think that it's reasonable to suspect that there is some intelligence, some civilization on its way here from that part of space, and that they've known about it for decades, and that we're preparing for it. But the leadership of today, the globalists among them, are definitely going to use that threat, a very real threat, to terrorize us with fear again, like they did 20 years ago after 9/11, to get us to buy off on all these controls and stuff, because we're going to protect you from the alien threat. And it's not, again, I emphasize, I don't think the alien threat is fake or a lie. I think it's what they're going to do in the name of it that is going to be a lie.
Yeah, Carol Rosen, I know her pretty well. I don't think she would lie, but I do believe she could have misinterpreted it.
Well, she could have misinterpreted it. And look, she's also involved with an organization called PEACE, peace is how it's spelled out. And they are very much, they were founded in the 90s. And one of the two founders, a guy named, look him up, a Dr. Halowitz, he has a very checkered past he lost his license for sexual abuse of patients. And this guy has a really creepy, kind of sleazy background. And he's one of the two founders of this peace organization, which is very much involved with, kind of one world globalist kind of political agenda issues.
Definitely.
And so look at the interpretation of the von Braun thing that Carol Rosen gives. I think it's possible that they probably were using Carol Rosen,
I would agree,
for their agenda. And so I personally, right now, my biggest suspicion is that she's misinterpreting what von Braun would have meant. There are other possibilities, but that's my number one choice.
One day I'm going to do a whole show on Werner. That guy was one fascinating dude.
Yeah, and you gotta wonder, because he's got the checkered past himself. There's a duality. Yep. I mean, the guy. There's a photo of him in his SS uniform during the war, and he doesn't look like a guy who's forced to be socializing with these guys. He's got a big grin. And he's having a great time. Also, when he got here, he was one of the ones that Army counterintelligence reported was secretly. They were still working in their chain of command, their Nazi scientist chain of command. He was one of the ones driving that. He was known to be very arrogant towards Americans and stuff. He was basically just a smarmy jerk,
Yep.
and keeping stuff, So you know, when you look at the possibility of post-war Nazi influence, certainly they helped build our military-industrial complex and all that Joseph Farrell Nazi International kind of influence.
Absolutely.
You have to wonder to what degree von Braun, the great hero of NASA, still might have been a part of something nefarious. And you have to ask that. You can't just heroize this guy because of your nostalgia for Apollo 11. You have to be objective about it. So we have to wonder what his motives would have been.
Well, I would say he was still working for the International. And we know that from FBI reports that he would go to Mexico and meet with escaped Germans from the 40s. I can't say the N word very much, but
yeah.
we know he did. So I would say he was still working on it. I would say that that this project that we started talking about at the beginning, World War II, well, it was a horrible war and many people died. I'm not going to deny that. But underneath World War II is this project.
Yeah.
The Germans are going everywhere. They're going to Peru. They're going to, they're digging for the Holy Grail. They're just like, they're doing all this work that I would do if I had unlimited funds. I would be doing exactly what they did. I would be sending guys everywhere.
And you're right. That was a project that was like Joseph Farrell again, good friend, likes to ask people, he tells people, where were the Horton brothers during all this time, right? And I mean, they knew they were in South America, but where exactly were they? What were they doing? And you're right. There was this, paperclip Germans were working for the United States. Yeah, there were Germans, working in Russia. Yeah, there were the Germans we knew that were in other parts of the world in South America. And they had those commitments, superficial on the surface commitments. But you're right. Underneath it all, they all seem to be pushing to, their respective employers all to this unified level of technology, right? That, is still secret to this day.
Yeah, I even question the Cold War now. I mean, I know it really happened, but was it really as bad as they were trying to make it out to be?
Right. What was really, really going on there? And
yeah, because we know that we were giving Russia technology or Soviets technology. And
I have a comment on that from personal experience. I was at Wright-Patterson for 3 years. I was chief of a counterespionage branch.
Really?
Operations branch, yeah.
Wow.
And in counterespionage, it's double agentry. Okay. That in itself, folks, the fact that we do double agent operations is not classified. Okay. What's classified is who we used, the specific thing, but what they do and where they went and stuff. But what a double agent does is goes to a foreign intelligence service, usually hostile to their own nation, and they pretend to be wanting to be a traitor, essentially. They pretend to be either pissed off at their own country or they pretend to need money and whatever. So they offer classified information to that foreign intelligence service. Now, foreign intelligence services know that because they do it too. It's called provocations, and they know we're all provocating, provoking each other. But what it is they also know that a percentage of that classified material that you're passing, it's called passage material, it's real stuff. So the game is, okay, this guy coming to us in our embassy and wherever, okay, them pesky Americans, this is probably a provocation, but some of the data that this guy is giving us could be real. So we'll play the game, we'll meet with them, that kind of thing. Now, so real stuff gets passed, or stuff when you're the operational agent, the Pentagon is the one who gives you your passage material and says, have your guy give this. Well, you're not an engineer yourself, so you don't know how much of that is the real deal. So one day after 2.5 years of being chief of this branch, I'm sitting at my desk having my coffee, Agent Bosley sitting there, and I realize, oh my God, double agentry would be a perfect way for the two nations to share the technology. In other words, what guys like me are doing, we're told, oh, you're protecting America, you're doing it for the team. Blah. Now, don't get me wrong. In a war combat theater, it is legit. What you're doing really is, because you're working against the combat enemy. But when you're back stateside and you're doing this peacetime stuff, it would be very easy if the US was sharing technology with the Russians. Well, how are we going to get it to them? Let's use the DA operations process, and they'll know when the agents won't know. The agents will think, oh, we're really doing this. But when, headquarters says, aim one of your provocations at the GRU, okay, the Russian military intel guys, in their embassy in wherever, somewhere in Southeast Asia, wherever. We could play all over the world, and we did. And so, okay, and give them this stuff. Okay, headquarters. So then our job is to do the sneaky deaky agent stuff, and we would think it's legit. Oh, we're really gonna fool those Russians, whatever. And even their agents think, oh, we're really gonna fool those Americans, when their higher ups the whole time have agreed.
Just exchanging information.
Yeah, we want you to have this X technology. Okay, how are we going to get it? We're going to pass it through our double agent program, and you'll get it in your embassy down in Argentina. Okay, great. And then we, the agents, think we're being real agents. Well, I figured, this dawned on me, a couple of years into this, I'm like, this could not be real. And what happened to me was, at that point, I thought, well, if what I'm doing here at any given time is not really what I think it is, I don't want to do it anymore. Because I was an agent. I wanted to be really. So at that point, I kind of genuinely lost interest, and it was time to get another job. And that's what I did. I got involved with counterterrorism operations.
Right.
But so back then, this was in 1998. I thought, holy crap, this is totally how they could be passing technology. Of
course, that's what they're doing.
So when people wonder, well, how would they do it? That's one way I can vouch for that they can do it.
That's actually
now, somebody knocks on my door and refers to me in my first name I haven't heard in years, Captain, then I know I'm in trouble for, if some guy in a uniform or a suit, Captain, may we speak to you? Oh, shoot.
Oh, what did I do?
Hasn't happened yet.
I don't think it'll happen.
No.
Well, hey, Walter, it's been great having you. You're always entertaining as hell.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Connect dots and really into this whole project thing and the Templars. And I really want to get to the bottom of the San Francisco question. And I'm actually going to go there, and
I'm intrigued with that. And if you don't have the books I was talking about afterwards, get me your address and
I will. Please. I want to definitely get the map of the telluric currents. That one. Yeah. Wow. That's
you'll find that interesting. And oh, by the way, my books, of course, they're not available at Amazon. They're only available at lulu.com, print on demand. It's worth the wait. They're very quality books. Amazon's not good for small press publishers, so that's why I don't go through Amazon. But lulu.com, lulu.com.
Yeah, they're a good company, Lulu. Yeah. Okay, I'll put the link below. And everybody support Walter and his books. They're great. Every one of them. They're really intriguing in that they're nonfiction, so that you're reading real mysteries, not BS mysteries. So, all right, Walter, really good having you on.
Well, thanks again, Jay. I look forward to doing this again.
All right, everybody, this is Reality Check. I'm Jay Weidner, and thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hit like and subscribe and tell your friends, and that's it. Thank you.